For decades, Hollywood sold us a dream. Glamour, perfection, untouchable stars. But behind the velvet curtain were secrets. Heartbreaking family tragedies, hidden betrayals, and lives torn apart just to protect a spotless image. Today, we're peeling back the illusion. These are the untold family secrets of 15 iconic stars that the studios fought hard to bury. This is classic Hollywood like you've never seen it before. On-screen text, shocking family scandals, hidden tragedies, real lives. Don't forget to subscribe because truth never ages, just like classic Hollywood. Clark Gable, the haunted king of Hollywood. He was Rhett Butler, the irresistible rogue, the dream-leading man, the embodiment of old Hollywood masculinity. On screen, Clark Gable oozed confidence and charm. But behind the smirk and swagger was a boy who grew up in the shadow of deep personal trauma. Gable's story didn't begin in a mansion under studio lights. It began in Kadis, Ohio in 1901 with a tragedy. His mother died before he could even speak her name. He was left in the care of his father, William Gable, a man whose reputation in town was shaped by booze, brutality, and a blazing temper. Neighbors whispered about the fights, about the way William treated his son, not like a child, but like a rival. His discipline often crossed the line into abuse, and as Clark grew older, so did the tension in that house. By his teenage years, the boy who would one day become a king of the screen did the only thing he could. He ran. He took odd jobs, slept wherever he could, anything to escape the rage-filled grip of a father who never taught him love. Only survival. When Gable finally reached Hollywood, he brought with him the habits of someone who had learned to hide his pain behind a practiced smile. Studio execs saw something in him, a tough exterior, a commanding presence. But they also saw danger in the truth. So MGM went to work. They erased his backstory. They paid off sources. They buried any trace of William Gable's run-ins with the law or violent past. No interviews, no family photos, no awkward questions. Publicists even intervened when reporters tried to dig into his childhood, offering money, favors, and silence in return for discretion. And Gable? He never spoke of his past. He avoided interviews about his upbringing. He kept the media away from his personal life, especially his father. Friends said he carried guilt for leaving William behind, but also understood it was the only way to protect himself and his future. As his fame grew, so did the distance between the public image and the private man. That cool confidence we all saw? It wasn't just acting, it was armor. Clark Gable didn't just reinvent himself, he escaped himself. But no amount of fame could truly erase the shadows he carried. His story is one of triumph built on heartbreak, and a reminder that even Hollywood royalty often rises from the ashes of very real, very painful beginnings. Lana Turner, the starlet, the gangster, and the knight that changed everything. She was the platinum goddess of the silver screen, a siren of old Hollywood with a voice like velvet and a face that defined glamour. Lana Turner wasn't just famous, she was mythic. But behind the gowns, the red carpet, and the dazzling close-ups, Lana's life was a powder keg of private pain, one that finally exploded one violent night in 1958. By then, Turner had become a household name, but her relationships off-screen were anything but dreamy. She fell for Johnny Stompanato, a man as smooth as he was dangerous. A former bodyguard for Mickey Cohen, one of LA's most notorious mobsters, Stompanato had a reputation for charm, jealousy, and control, and more than a few rumors of abuse. To the public, they were just another glamorous couple. But inside Lana's Beverly Hills home, there were screams behind the walls and bruises behind the makeup. Friends and staff heard the fights, saw the tension. Lana never said much. In that era, stars were expected to smile and keep quiet, especially women. But her daughter, Cheryl Crane, couldn't keep quiet. She was just 14 years old. And on that fateful night, she watched the man who claimed to love her mother lunge into another violent rage. Afraid, no, terrified, Cheryl grabbed a kitchen knife. Seconds later, Johnny Stompanato was dead. The scandal rocked Hollywood like an earthquake. Headlines screamed. Paparazzi swarmed the house. And Lana, once a symbol of untouchable elegance, was now a grieving mother in the middle of a manslaughter investigation. The coroner's inquest became national theater, broadcast across the country. Cheryl testified, she did it to protect her mother. The jury ruled it a justifiable homicide. But in Hollywood, even innocence has consequences. Lana's image shattered. Some called her a victim. Others called her a monster. Studio publicists scrambled to control the damage. Lana wore black to court. She cried on cue. She played the role of her life. But privately, she was devastated. Not just by the killing, but by the years of silence and fear that led up to it. The truth, the bruises, the threats, the emotional damage never made it to the front page. That part of the story stayed hidden, just as the studios liked it. And even as Lana Turner tried to rebuild her career and return to the screen, the tragedy never left her. Nor did the guilt her daughter carried, a child forced to become a protector in a world that refused to protect them. Lana Turner's story isn't just about Hollywood glamour. It's about how quickly that glamour can turn to horror. It's about the violence that fame could never keep out, and the deep, private scars behind the red lipstick and the movie posters. Errol Flynn, the hero who couldn't save his own son. He was the face of fearless adventure. The sword-swinging, devil-may-care rogue in Captain Blood, the Seahawk, and the adventures of Robin Hood. Errol Flynn didn't just play the swashbuckler, he was the swashbuckler. To audiences, he was immortal, untouchable, unbreakable. But behind the legend was a man unraveling. Flynn's early life in Australia gave little hint of the chaos to come. Son of a respected professor, young Errol always felt like a misfit, restless, rebellious, and drawn to danger. He left home early, roamed the South Pacific, and chased trouble wherever it hid. When Hollywood called, he was ready, or so it seemed. The public loved his daring. The studios loved his box office. But behind the scenes, Flynn was spiraling. His life became a blur of extravagant parties, legal battles, and scandals the studios scrambled to cover up. Accusations followed him, some serious, some salacious. Each time the studio machine moved in, scrubbing headlines, buying silence. And yet, even the best PR couldn't protect Flynn from the one tragedy he never saw coming. His son, Sean Flynn, inherited his father's thirst for excitement. But Sean didn't chase fame, he chased truth. He became a war photographer, driven to document the violence in Vietnam and Cambodia. Handsome, brave, and talented, Sean walked into the heart of conflict, and in April 1970 he disappeared. Captured, possibly tortured, never found. No ransom, no remains. Just silence. For Errol Flynn, it was the moment everything collapsed. The man who once grinned at danger now saw it reflected back at him. In the face of a missing son who'd followed his own reckless path, friends say Flynn blamed himself, that Sean's fate was the price of his own sins, that the adventures, the drinking, the chaos, it had all come back to punish him through the person he loved most. The studios did what they always did. They kept it quiet. The press coverage was minimal. There were no teary press conferences or dramatic search efforts like today. They didn't want Hollywood's golden pirate remembered as a broken father. But he was. Behind closed doors, Flynn was haunted. In his final years, aged far beyond his 50 years, he retreated from the spotlight. His legendary charm dulled by regret, his swagger fading into sorrow. Errol Flynn died just 9 years after Sean vanished. His heart, they said, gave out. But those who knew him best believe it wasn't his heart. It was the grief that finally killed him. His was a life lived at full speed, and a legacy that reminds us. Sometimes the real adventure isn't on the screen. It's surviving what happens when the cameras stop rolling. Number 4, Charlie Chaplin, the little tramp with the weight of the world on his shoulders. He was the silent era's beating heart. With a bowler hat, cane, and that unforgettable mustache, Charlie Chaplin became one of the most beloved figures in cinema history. His little tramp made the world laugh and cry without saying a word. But behind those iconic shuffles and tender smiles was a childhood so bleak, so heartbreaking, it was hidden for decades by design. Chaplin was born into the bitter cold of Victorian London in 1889 to two music hall performers, Charles Chaplin Sr. and Hannah Chaplin. His father vanished into the bottle and into absence. His mother? She gave him her talent, her tenderness, and eventually, her madness. When Hannah Chaplin began to suffer from severe mental illness, Charlie was just a boy, helpless as the woman who once sang him lullabies slipped into delusion. She was institutionalized, locked away, and Charlie and his brother Sidney were cast into the brutal world of workhouses and orphanages where warmth was rare, food was scarce, and kindness was not part of the curriculum. That's the childhood Chaplin never wanted the world to see. Because when he finally made it to Hollywood, he wasn't just escaping poverty. He was escaping the shame that came with it. In an era where studios demanded perfection, Chaplin knew that admitting he was once a street urchin with a mentally ill mother could cost him everything. So he let the press spin the tale of a rags-to-riches genius. But the truth was much darker. Charlie had been cold, hungry, and alone. The very pain that gave birth to his genius also haunted him his entire life. Even as he became the most famous man on the planet, Chaplin remained guarded. His adult life was filled with tumultuous relationships, paternity lawsuits, and political controversy. But deeper than all the headlines was a man still trying to heal from a childhood that had taught him love was fleeting and the world was cruel. He adored his mother until the end. Once he had money, he brought her to California, gave her the finest care. But he never stopped carrying the image of her staring blankly into space, lost to the world. The tenderness in his films? That was real. The yearning in city lights, the despair in modern times, the heartbreak in The Kid, all of it came from a wounded soul who used comedy to survive. Chaplin made the world laugh, but the sound he never forgot was his mother's voice fading into silence. His story is a reminder that behind even the brightest eyes and most joyful characters can lie a deep, aching sadness. A sadness that birthed timeless art, but never truly went away. Number 5. Judy Garland, the voice of hope, born from silence and shame. She sang of a place somewhere over the rainbow, a world without pain, without fear. A place she desperately longed for but never found. Judy Garland wasn't just a star. She was a symbol of innocence, vulnerability, and raw emotion. Her voice touched something deep in the human soul. But what most people never knew was that Judy's life was shaped not by the magic of Oz, but by a childhood filled with secrets, stigma, and silent suffering. Born Frances Ethel Gumm in 1922, Judy was the youngest in a family that looked wholesome on the outside. But behind closed doors, they were haunted by whispers and scandal. Her father, Frank Gumm, was adored in their small Minnesota town. Kind, soft-spoken, but also the subject of growing rumors about relationships with young men. In that era, such speculation wasn't just controversial, it was dangerous. The moment gossip reached a tipping point, the family vanished overnight, quietly fleeing town under the guise of a job opportunity. The truth? They were escaping the kind of scrutiny that could destroy reputations and futures. Judy never fully understood the move. She was only 4, but that uprooting, that buried shame, cast a long shadow over her childhood. Her mother, Ethel, was determined to control Judy's future, grooming her for stardom with relentless precision. Ethel saw show business as salvation, but for Judy, it became a gilded cage. When MGM signed Judy, they saw talent, but not perfection. She didn't fit the blonde bombshell mold, so the studio reshaped her. They altered her teeth, bound her chest, and put her on pills, uppers to perform, downers to sleep, all while demanding she smile like the nation's sweetheart. Meanwhile, the truth about her father's departure, his secret, remained unspoken. Judy adored him, but he died when she was just 13, leaving her with unanswered questions and a hole in her heart that fame would never fill. She carried that loss with her through every song, every film. her desperate longing for approval, her spiraling insecurities, her painful relationships. They all began in that little house in Minnesota, long before the yellow brick road. Garland was a powerhouse on stage, but off it, she was fragile, exhausted, and aching for a childhood she never had. The perfection the studio sold to the world came at the price of Judy's peace of mind, and eventually, her life. Her voice was beautiful because it broke your heart, because it came from a girl who was never allowed to be one. Judy Garland's story is more than stardom. It's a reminder that even those who bring joy to millions may be fighting battles the world will never see. Number 6. Ingrid Bergman, the goddess who was cast out. She was beauty, elegance, purity. On screen, Ingrid Bergman was everything Hollywood adored. In films like Casablanca and Gaslight, she didn't just act, she glowed. To the public, she was the embodiment of virtue and grace. But in 1949, that image shattered. And Hollywood didn't just look away, it turned on her. Bergman was born in Sweden, raised with discipline, modesty, and strong values. She wasn't your typical starlet. No scandals. No headline-grabbing parties. She was married to Dr. Petter Lindström, a respected Swedish physician, and together they had a young daughter, Pia. Their life looked like a picture-perfect postcard. But behind the image, Ingrid was restless. She longed for something more than Hollywood glamour, a deeper connection, something real, something human. And in Italy, while working with revolutionary director Roberto Rossellini, she found it. What began as an artistic collaboration turned into a passionate, full-blown affair. The problem? They were both married. When Bergman became pregnant with Rossellini's child, the illusion collapsed. There was no hiding it. The press erupted. Religious groups called her an instrument of sin. Senators stood on the floor of Congress and denounced her by name. Fan clubs burned her photographs. She wasn't just shamed, she was exiled. Studios, once eager to showcase her face, now erased it. America, once in love with her, turned cold. She gave birth to her son in Italy, alone, far from Hollywood, far from her daughter Pia, who remained in the US with her father. That forced separation would leave deep scars on both mother and child. For years, Bergman was banned, not by decree, but by silence. Her name vanished from marquees, her voice from radio, her face from magazines. And yet, she did not break. She stayed in Europe, married Rossellini, and had more children. Though the press painted her as a fallen woman, she never apologized for following her heart. Her dignity never wavered, and in 1956, nearly a decade after her fall from grace, she returned to Hollywood, not in shame, but in triumph. She won an Academy Award for Anastasia, standing on that stage not just as a star, but as a survivor. Behind the glamour, Ingrid Bergman's story is one of courage, exile, and redemption. She was punished not for breaking the law, but for breaking expectations, for choosing passion over performance, truth over image. Her legacy isn't just cinematic, it's revolutionary. A reminder that Hollywood builds goddesses, but the women behind them are always human. Number 7. Gene Tierney, the beauty Hollywood couldn't protect. She was one of the most exquisite faces to ever grace the silver screen. In films like Laura and Leave Her to Heaven, Gene Tierney radiated elegance, mystery, and restraint. Audiences saw perfection. But behind that flawless face was a heartbreak so private, so devastating, that it was hidden from the world for decades, even from her closest friends. In 1943, at the height of her fame, Gene attended a USO event at the Hollywood Canteen, a place where soldiers and fans could meet their screen idols. She was pregnant, glowing, and eager to support the troops. What she didn't know was that one young fan, desperate to see her, had broken quarantine to attend. That woman had been infected with rubella, or German measles. Days later, Tierney fell ill, and when her daughter Daria was born, the consequences were life-altering. Daria was born severely disabled. She was deaf, partially blind, and cognitively impaired. The connection to that brief, fateful encounter was confirmed by doctors. A single moment of admiration from a fan had forever altered the course of Gene Tierney's life. In an era that stigmatized disability, the studio quickly stepped in. There were no interviews, no public statements, no magazine spreads with baby photos. Instead, Daria was quietly placed in a specialized care facility where she could receive the attention Tierney and her husband, fashion designer Oleg Cassini, were told they could not provide. The decision crushed Jean. She blamed herself. She blamed the fan. She blamed the system that taught her she had to smile through her pain and pretend nothing had happened. Behind the camera, Jean descended into a deep depression. For years, she struggled with her mental health, enduring multiple breakdowns, electric shock therapy, and time in psychiatric hospitals. All while continuing to act, continuing to be beautiful, continuing to keep the secret. For decades, no one knew, because no one was supposed to. The woman who had it all, the fame, the beauty, the admiration, carried a grief so profound and so silent that it nearly destroyed her. Years later, the very fan who had broken quarantine approached her again. She confessed, tearfully, apologetically. She had been told not to go, but she went anyway, desperate to meet her idol. And she did. But the cost of that moment would echo for the rest of Tierney's life. Jean eventually shared her story in her memoir, peeling back the carefully crafted Hollywood mask. And when she did, it wasn't for sympathy. It was for truth. Her story is a reminder that sometimes tragedy doesn't come from scandal or betrayal, but from chance. A moment. A single decision. Gene Tierney was more than a pretty face. She was a mother, a survivor, and a woman who found strength not in hiding her heartbreak, but in finally telling it. Number 8. Mary Astor, the diary that almost destroyed a star. She was the epitome of poise and sophistication. With roles in The Maltese Falcon and The Great Lie, Mary Astor was beloved for her intelligence, elegance, and quiet strength. But behind her calm, on-screen presence, Mary's private life was a battlefield, one that would explode into one of the most scandalous custody trials in Hollywood history. Astor wasn't born into luxury. She was born Lucille Vasconcelos Lanjanque in 1906 to strict German immigrant parents who were determined to make her a star. They controlled everything: her career, her finances, even her friendships. Fame didn't liberate her, it only tightened their grip. As she rose through the Hollywood ranks, her personal life grew more complex. Her marriage to Dr. Franklin Thorpe seemed respectable on the surface, but it quickly devolved into bitterness, jealousy, and power struggles. When their relationship ended in 1935, the fight wasn't over. It had only just begun. What followed was a custody battle over their young daughter, Marilyn, and Thorpe came armed with a weapon: Mary's private diary. Inside were intimate, unfiltered thoughts, details of affairs, including one with playwright George S. Kaufman, and entries exposing her deepest emotions and personal pain. Thorpe leaked them to the press, and in an instant, Mary Astor went from beloved actress to tabloid target. The trial was front-page news. Her private life was paraded before the public like a circus act. Crowds lined up outside the courthouse. Reporters devoured every salacious detail. But what few knew was that the diary itself had become a weapon long before the courtroom. Behind the scenes, Mary had already faced threats from her own family, relatives who saw her fame as a financial opportunity and were willing to use the diary's contents to manipulate or shame her into submission. It wasn't just a legal case, it was a betrayal. By a husband, by her blood, by a system that demanded actresses be perfect and punished them for being human. Studios held their breath. Her career teetered on the edge. But Mary didn't back down. In court, she stood her ground, and in the end, the judge awarded her custody of her daughter. The scandal faded, but the pain didn't. The betrayal of her privacy had cut deeper than any role could express. She never trusted easily again. And while she went on to win an Academy Award, her personal life remained marked by emotional caution and hard-won independence. Mary Astor's story isn't just about a leaked diary. It's about what happens when a woman refuses to let shame define her, when she survives the worst and walks back into the light, not because she was flawless, but because she was strong enough to be flawed in public. Number 9. Spencer Tracy. The silent struggle of Hollywood's most respected man. He was the face of Dignity, a towering talent whose performances in Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, Father of the Bride, and Captain's Courageous defined an era. Spencer Tracy was respected by peers, loved by audiences, and trusted by studios. He seemed solid, dependable, unshakable. But behind the camera, Tracy was a man at war with himself, caught between his faith, his fame, and a family secret he carried like a stone in his heart. In 1923, long before he became a star, Spencer married Louise Treadwell, a brilliant woman with poise, strength, and vision. A year later, their son John was born. But something was wrong. John wasn't responding to sounds. Tests confirmed what no parent ever wants to hear. John was deaf. For Spencer Tracy, devoutly Catholic and emotionally reserved, the diagnosis hit like a wrecking ball. In a time when disabilities were whispered about in shame, Tracy saw his son's condition as a punishment, though he could never say what for. The guilt consumed him. The silence between father and son became metaphor and reality. Louise, fiercely determined, responded differently. She threw herself into helping John, eventually founding the John Tracy Clinic, a groundbreaking institution for children with hearing loss. Her courage changed countless lives. But Spencer? He retreated, into work, into alcohol, into self-recrimination. His success grew, but so did his torment. He began disappearing for days, drinking heavily, collapsing under the pressure of reconciling his public image with his private despair. He and Louise never divorced, but they lived apart, bound by love, respect, and shared grief. To the world, they were still married. Behind closed doors, they were two people carrying different parts of the same sorrow. The studios helped keep the truth out of the headlines. No one talked about John. No one asked. No one published photos. It was an unspoken agreement. Spencer Tracy was to remain a pillar, not a man broken by guilt, faith, and a family he couldn't save. But those who knew him, really knew him, said that every character he played, every subtle look, every moment of gravitas, was touched by the pain he never voiced. He poured it into his roles, quietly channeling the ache of a father who loved deeply but from too far away. Only later in life, when the weight grew too heavy, did Tracy speak openly about his son. The pride was there, the regret too. But mostly there was love. Quiet, aching, undying love. Spencer Tracy's legacy is filled with awards, accolades, and unforgettable performances. But beneath it all is a man who carried a secret sorrow, not of scandal or betrayal, but of a father's heartbreak, hidden for the sake of a perfect Hollywood image. His story reminds us, sometimes the most powerful performances are the ones never seen on screen. Number 10. Gloria Graham. The starlet who crossed a line. Hollywood couldn't forgive. She won an Oscar. She was unforgettable in The Bad and the Beautiful, haunting in A Lonely Place, and utterly electric in The Big Heat. Gloria Graham had a voice like smoke and eyes that never quite told the truth. She was film noir's dream girl, equal parts danger and vulnerability. But Graham's greatest role, the one she tried hardest to hide, wasn't in front of a camera. It was behind closed doors, in a love story that Hollywood buried for years because it crossed a line no studio could clean up. Her personal life was a string of turbulent marriages and emotional wreckage. But the most explosive chapter began during her second marriage to director Nicholas Ray. Their relationship was rocky, riddled with conflict and mistrust. But what no one expected was the secret that would later come to define her entire life. During their marriage, Gloria allegedly began a relationship with Ray's teenage son from a previous marriage, Tony Ray. Yes, her stepson. The whispers swirled in the shadows of Hollywood. The studios got wind of it. And in true Golden Age fashion, they acted fast, hiding the scandal, suppressing stories, and issuing public denials. Gloria and Nicholas Ray divorced and the rumor was buried, but the truth had a way of finding her again.